Today's lesson is, what's your favorite pastry? Hi, everyone. I'm Mike.
I am Roger, and today we're going to listen to a conversation between Jack and Edna, and they're talking about food. More specifically, they're talking about pastries, which are those things you can buy in bakeries.
Exactly right. Bakeries and patisseries if you're in France. And of course, France is famous for its delicious pastries. We'll get into those, but of course, I can mention croissants, macarons, palmiers, things like that, and millefeuille if feeling really fancy. These are little snacks. You might have them as a dessert, as part of a meal, but I think more typically they might be eaten with breakfast. Maybe if you're having a very traditional French breakfast, you might have a cup of coffee and a pastry along with that, or you might have it as a mid-morning snack, maybe as a late afternoon sort of snack with your tea or something like that. But they're sweet, they're delicious, they're largely made with wheat and flour and other things that are tasty and sweet. So let's get into it. Part 1 is about the world's most popular pastries. This is a great list. If you've never actually experienced any of these, we'll be having a whole bunch of great examples and great suggestions with Jack and Edna as they discuss some of their favorite pastries. So let's get into the dialogue. What's your favorite pastry? The world's most popular pastries. Jack and Edna are hanging out at home when Jack comes across an interesting article on his phone. Hey, I just found an article listing the 10 most popular pastries in the world.
Really? What are they?
According to this, they include croissants, eclairs, macarons.
Those are all French pastries, right?
I believe you're right. But let's see. There are also churros, which I think originated in Spain, and cannoli, which come from Italy.
I don't think I've ever had a cannoli before.
Oh, you've definitely got to try one sometime. You haven't lived until you've enjoyed some cannoli with a nice cup of coffee at a sunny cafe.
So, are cannoli your favorite option on that list?
Well, they're certainly tough to beat, although I'm also partial to baklavas, strudels, donuts.
So basically, you just love virtually every kind of pastry?
That pretty much sums it up.
大家好，标题中介绍名词 pastry， 它的意思是油酥糕点或是茶点。例如 A freshly baked pastry is always a satisfying treat. 新鲜出炉的糕点总是一件令人满意的享受。或者 I often buy a pastry from the bakery for breakfast. 我经常从面包店购买油酥糕点作为早餐。再来看到副词 definitely， 表示肯定、当然或是明确的。例如I will definitely attend the concert. I've been looking forward to it for months. 我绝对会去那场演唱会，我已经期待了好几个月。或是 May's new album is definitely better than her last one. May 的新专辑肯定会比她的上一张好。接着看到形容词 partial， 它的意思是偏爱的、喜欢的、偏袒的或是部分的。例如 Claudia is partial to long walks on the beach and beautiful sunsets.Claudia 偏好沙滩漫步和美丽的落日。也可以说 I only received a partial refund when I returned the blouse. 我退回这件衬衫时只收到部分退款。再来介绍单字 virtually， 这个副词表示几乎、实际上或是虚拟的。我们可以说 It is virtually impossible to know which one of them is telling the truth. 几乎不可能得知他们当中哪一个说的才是实话。又或者说This new app allows you to try out different hairstyles virtually. 这个新的应用程式允许您虚拟的尝试不同的发型。
Okay, let's talk about Jack and Edna's conversation. Yeah, they're hanging out at home, and then Jack comes across an interesting article on his phone. Of course, they're probably spending time together, swiping their phones, and they come across some interesting information. It's an article, I guess, about pastries, and he says, Hey, I just found an article listing the 10 most popular pastries in the world. Indeed, if you're on social media, a lot of times they send out these posts that are are lists of things. Here's the best livable cities in the world, or here's the most polluted cities in the world, or whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Well, he's come across a list that lists or gives us a list of the 10 most popular pastries in the world. I'd like to know the answer to that. What are the most popular pastries in the world?
Very, very interesting. Yeah, a lot of these, as you said, online websites will have these lists that are also articles. There's actually a new term. They're called listicles. Yeah, a lot of people love those. So, best top 10 Friends episodes or best cities for shopping or something like that. And they'll have descriptions. It'll be a list, but it'll also have more of an article feel to it with information. Maybe tell you a little bit of the history or why they have this opinion. And of course, they're great for conversation and debate with your friends. So the most popular pastries in the world, really, Edna says, what are they? She's curious about this. Never seen a list like that. And, let's see if my favorites are on there or if they include ones that I'm like, oh, those are terrible pastries. Why would you put that on the list or something like that? And of course, everyone will argue about what's number one because probably most people will agree that that one shouldn't be number one. It should be this one. Anyways, Jack says, according to this, they include, so included on this list, they include croissants or croissants, éclairs, and macarons or macarons, which of course are all French, as Edna knows.
Right, and of course, the French expect us to pronounce these words correctly, but I think most people outside of France will say croissants, even though the French say, no, it's croissant, or something like that. But you can say croissant, that's fine if you're talking to Americans or whoever. Sure. And we've got éclairs, that's what I called them when I was a kid. What's the correct pronunciation on
éclairs.
that? Éclair,
okay. Or éclair, yeah.
Okay, and macarons, and that's, of course, another kind of pastry that is very popular in the world. I'm kind of disappointed. I wanted to see the Long Johns as the most popular pastry, or a bear claw.
Interesting. We should mention macarons have an American or an English cousin called a macaroon.
Yeah.
Now, a macaroon, that has 2 O's at the end, so R-O-O-N. That is very different.
Yeah, what's the difference?
It's a cookie, but it's basically a chocolate coconut cookie. That would be a macaroon, whereas a macaron is made with more sort of like a meringue type of thing. It's a crispy meringue pastry with jam in the middle. They're French. They're very expensive. I would make macaroons, chocolate and coconut, at home. I would never try to make macaron at home. And I would also expect to pay a lot more for a macaron or a macaron. Whereas a macaroon, the chocolate coconut one, I think I made those with my mom when I was like 9 years old. So they're fun and easy and not as expensive, but have very similar names. So don't get them confused. Anyways, yes, they are all French pastries. I believe you're right, Jack says. Yeah, I think you're right. The croissant, the éclair, and the macaron are all French. But let's see. There are also churros, which I think originated in Spain, and cannoli, which come from Italy. So they're not all French pastries on this list. They have churros there, kind of like those long stick-like donuts, which I know are available here in Taiwan, even at movie theaters, in fact. And cannolis, which come from Italy. That is a very traditional Italian dessert. I've seen them here, but only in Italian restaurants. I've never actually seen a cannoli, which is basically a tube filled with a sweet whipping cream. I've never seen them in many bakeries here, but you can get them at Italian restaurants.
Well, I'm sure there's a bakery or two here in Taiwan that sell them as well. But churros, according to this, are from Spain, or at least according to Jack. I think they also may be from Latin America, but if that's the case, if they're from Spain or Latin America, then you should pronounce this word as churros.
Wow, that's a lot of R's.
No, I'm just showing off my ability to do the rolled R there.
Really
you don't have to do that. You can say churro and everybody will understand. And Edna says, I don't think I've ever had a cannoli before. And I'm with Edna here. I don't think I've ever had one before either. Or if I had one, I did not know I was eating one.
They're tricky because, as I said, it's sort of a light pastry tube filled with this whipped cream. I don't think you can really make them too much before you sell them or eat them because they get very soggy and moist, right? The cream will kind of make that pastry very, very wet. So I think it's one of those things you kind of have to have a local bakery because they'll make them and then sell a few and then make a few more and sell a few more. So it's not the kind of thing you can prepare a long time in advance, which may explain why they're harder to find. Oh, Jack says, though, you've definitely got to try one sometime. If you've you've never had a cannoli, you must or you've definitely got to. When we say you've definitely got to or I have definitely need to, that's basically saying I really, really need to. Basically, I must need to. This is something I have to do. You have to try one sometime. This is his opinion. They're just so good. You don't want to miss out on this experience. You haven't lived, he says, until you've enjoyed some cannoli with a nice cup of coffee at a sunny cafe. So there you go. You haven't lived. You haven't really experienced life. This is kind of a bit of an exaggeration, clearly. Edna has lived, but he's kind of saying you haven't lived the best life you can possibly live. You haven't experienced all the wonders of life until you've enjoyed some cannoli with a nice cup of coffee at a sunny cafe. That is truly a lovely experience to have.
It sounds like a lovely experience, but you can keep it. I would more enjoy having some nice oolong tea here in the mountains with some snacks along with that.
A pineapple cake.
That would be pretty tasty as well. But, you know, if you're in Italy or something, you should certainly try this. And if I go, I'll certainly try that as well. And yes, Edna has never had one before. Jack says you definitely got to try one. And Edna says, so, are cannoli your favorite option on that list? So he's talking favorably about cannoli, so she thinks that, hey, that may be your number one pastry in the world.
Jack says, well, they're certainly tough to beat. He's not saying that they're number one, but they are hard to beat. They're close to number one, and it's difficult for him to think of another type of pastry that would beat them, that would be number one and push cannolis down to number two. They're tough to beat. They're hard to beat. They are very close to being my favorite, although he has a few others, although he says, I'm also partial to baklavas, strudels, donuts, and he goes on and on and on. Clearly, Jack is a big fan of pastries of all shapes and sizes from all corners of the world. He's partial to lots of different styles of tasty treat. If you're partial to something, if we use it in this way, that basically means this is what you favor. This is kind of what you lean towards. You would do the other thing, but this is kind of your natural choice, your natural inclination. This is what you would rather do, but it's not a must. It's more of a preference. So he's partial. He has a preference for lots of different pastries, and he mentions baklavas, German strudels or Austrian strudels, and of course the classic American donut. And that causes Edna to laugh because I think he wasn't finished with that list. I'm pretty sure pineapple cakes from Taiwan was next.
That is indeed a very tasty pastry from Taiwan.
Yep.
And Edna is laughing. So basically, you just love virtually every kind of pastry.
Yeah,
basically. So virtually just means it appears that you like any kind of pastry and you're making quite a long list of all the pastries that you enjoy. And Jack is laughing too. And he says that pretty much sums it up. To sum something up just means to summarize something in a simple way. That is the simple truth. Yeah, I pretty much like all kinds of pastries, no matter what they are.
Absolutely right. He virtually loves them all, basically kind of saying he almost, avoiding any little details. Yes, he likes all of them. He would really choose all of them. He might have a few that are slightly more favorites, but he will never turn his nose up at any kind of pastry. That sums it up. That wraps it up. That's it in a nutshell. All right, that's it for our first dialogue, but we're going to come back with another one, so join us for part 2. Let's make our own pastries. Jack and Edna continue talking about their favorite pastries. You said you never tried cannoli, but what about churros?
Oh, yes. In fact, the first time I ever had churros was on a trip to Mexico.
I've never tried them. What are they like?
They're somewhat similar to donuts. They're made of fried dough that's crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and sprinkled with sugar. I had them with a cup of hot chocolate, which was so great.
They sound delicious.
They were. But how about you? Have you ever had any authentic pastries while traveling abroad?
The first thing that springs to mind is when I had some apple strudel at a cafe in Vienna. The flaky dough, apple, cinnamon, and sugar were an amazing combination. Honestly, I'm getting kind of hungry just thinking about it.
Well, why don't we try making some strudel or one of those other popular pastries ourselves?
Count me in. That sounds like a perfect way to spend a relaxing Sunday.
第二部分看到名词 dough， 它的意思是生面团。例如 Grandma covered the dough with a damp cloth and left it to rise. 奶奶用湿的布盖住面团，让它发酵。又或者说 Misty bought some flour to make pizza dough. Misty 买了一些面粉来做披萨面团。继续介绍动词 sprinkle， 指的是撒、点缀或是使零星分布。举例来说 Brandon sprinkled some salt and pepper on the soup to improve its flavor. Brandon 在汤里撒了一些盐和胡椒来提升它的风味。再来看到形容词 flaky， 表示酥脆的或是易脆成薄片的。例如 The pastries were light and flaky. 那些酥饼爽口又酥松。最后看到名词 cinnamon， 表示肉桂或是肉桂粉。我们可以说 Cinnamon sticks are essential for making traditional mulled wine. 肉桂棒是制作传统热红酒的必需品。也可以说The aroma of cinnamon filled the kitchen as the pie baked in the oven. 当派在烤箱中烘烤时，肉桂的香气充满了厨房。
Okay, here's part 2 for today. Of course, talking about pastries is one thing, but making them yourself is another. And that can be quite exciting, as you found out with your mother there when you were a kid making pastries with your mother.
Oh, that was fun.
And Jack and Edna continue their conversation about their favorite pastries.
All right.
And Jack says, you said you never tried cannoli, but what about churros? Have you tried those before?
Edna has. She says, oh, yes. So this is a memory of hers. Definitely she has. In fact, she says the first time I ever had churros was on a trip to Mexico. So there you go. She had them, maybe not in the place they were created, but certainly in a place where they are very closely related to. Jack, though, even though he might be a fan of them, he's never had one. He says, I've never tried them. What are they like? He wants to add them to his list of favorite pastries. So what are they like? What do they taste like?
Well, she answers his question. They're somewhat similar to donuts, okay? They're basically like donuts. They're made of fried dough that's crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and sprinkled with sugar, maybe some cinnamon as well. I had them with a cup of hot chocolate, which was so great. So she gives a pretty good definition of what churros are here. First of all, they're made of fried dough. Dough is basically what you get when you mix flour together with water and oil and other ingredients, and it's kind of soft, and it's what you have before you actually make a pastry or before you make a cake or whatever. You have the dough, and in this particular case they are deep fried, and so as a result of that deep frying they will be crispy on the outside and soft on the inside, and when they're removed from the oil and when they drip off they will be sprinkled with sugar. So here we've got the verb to sprinkle. That just means to apply something to something else in small quantities, maybe little particles or drops of something. And yes, it's sprinkled with sugar and maybe some other kinds of ingredients.
And she says, I had them with a cup of hot chocolate, which was so great. So imagine the hot chocolate, and you got this hot, crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, and sweet churro. I think sometimes people dip the churro in the hot chocolate, right? Like people here might dip their youtiao in their soy milk or something like that.
Similar.
So very, very nice. They sound delicious, Jack says. They were, Edna agrees. But what about you? So turning it back towards Jack, have you ever had any authentic pastries while traveling abroad? So, not buying that German pastry in Japan or something, but have the real pastry in the place that it was actually made. And Jack has. He says, the first thing that springs to mind, or the first thing that comes to his mind, the first thing he thinks of, is when I had some apple strudel at a cafe in Vienna. Ooh, that sounds lovely. Vienna is famous for its cafes. They actually have some Viennese-style cafes here in Taiwan. And then he goes on to describe an apple strudel. The flaky dough, apple, cinnamon, and sugar were an amazing combination. So that is basically the elements that you'll find making up a delicious Apfelstrudel, or apple strudel if you're not speaking German. Flaky dough that is very, very crisp and a little bit dry. And so when you bite into it, it kind of breaks off in little leaves and little pieces. Here I think of often sun cakes, right? Taiwanese sun cakes are very dry. If you take a bite and then start talking, a lot of powder and crumbs will fly out of your mouth because it's very dry. It's not kind of chewy and sticky. It might be soft, but it's dry and flaky and crispy. So that's what you're having. That's the pastry part. Then inside there's apple, there's cinnamon, which is a very delicious type of spice that you add to things. People often add cinnamon to their coffee or their hot chocolate, and you put it on desserts as well. And sugar, and this creates an amazing combination, an amazing mixture of different elements. When you combine these different elements, they stay on their own, but together they kind of end up being better than just each individual part or individual element. So this combination of the dough, the apple, the cinnamon, the sugar, it's all so good. Honestly, he says, I'm getting kind of hungry just thinking about it. Well, Jack, I'm getting hungry just describing it too.
Actually, this is a wonderful description of a strudel in Vienna, but you're mentioning sun cakes. Makes me hungry for them. I'm going to figure out a way to get to Taichung as soon as possible to get some sun cakes. Those are darn tasty. And here's what Edna says. Well, why don't we try making some strudel or one of those other popular pastries ourselves? Again, as I said at the beginning of the program, it's a wonderful thing to try to actually make these pastries yourself, especially if you can do it with friends or your family or whatever. And Jack says, count me in. I like that idea. I agree. Let's do it. That sounds like a perfect way to spend a relaxing Sunday. So yes, maybe it's a bad day. Maybe it's raining outside or a little too hot or whatever. And so they've decided to stay home and relax and do some baking. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。在课文第一部分的对话里， Jack 和 Edna 在家里消磨时间。那么 Jack 无意间看到手机里有一篇有趣的文章，文中是用到 come across 来表达无意间看到、偶然发现的意思。那我们来整理一下 come across 的不同用法。首先第一个呢，就是课文用法 come across 当及物用，去表达碰巧遇到、偶然发现。那它就会跟 come upon 或是 bump into、run into、run across 等等的意思相同，后面可以接人或者是事物，像是 We came across a charming cafe a few days ago。 我们几天前偶然发现一间迷人的那种咖啡小餐馆。好，那么第二个是 come across， 它是当不及物用来指说使产生什么什么印象，那么后面可以接 as 加上名词或形容词去表达给人什么样的印象或感觉，表现的怎么样。 come across 后面也可以接 negatively 或是 well 等等的副词来修饰。举例来说， She came across as a very intelligent person。 她给人的印象是个非常聪明的人。那第三个 come across 当不及物用，它还可以指说某个想法被清楚表达、了解的语义。例如His passion really came across when he talked about his job. 当他在聊他的工作时，可以看得出他的热忱，他讲话的方式清楚传达了他对工作的热情。好，那么在课文第二部分的对话里， Jack 和 Edna 聊到了在国外旅行时吃过的道地糕点。那么 Jack 说他第一个想到的就是维也纳一间咖啡店吃过的苹果卷。好，文中用到 spring to mind， 那这个用语要用事物当主词，表达某事物浮现在脑海中，突然想到某事物。 Spring 在这边是当动词，它有突然出现的意思，我们也可以用 come 或者是 leap 来代替。举例来说， What comes to mind when you think of Paris？ 当你想到巴黎时，脑海中浮现的是什么呢？好，那这边也补充几个动词 spring 的相关用法。第一个补充的是 spring up，它是表达突然出现、涌现，可以表达那种如雨后春笋般冒出的那种语义，像是 New hotels have been springing up in the city， 那个城市里到处都有新的旅馆开设。好，那第二个介绍的是 spring from something， 它可以表达发源于什么，源自于什么，像是 The idea for the book sprang from a dream she had， 那个书的构想是源自于她做的一个梦。那第三个介绍的是 spring into action 或是 spring to action， 还可以用 spring into life 或者是 spring to life， 那就可以表达出那种迅速采取行动或者是突然活跃起来的意思。举例来说， The street springs to life at night， 意思就是这条街到了晚上就突然热闹了起来。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Definitely. If this traffic doesn't get better, we're definitely going to be late. Partial. Julius has always been partial to Italian food. Virtually. We've seen virtually no errors in our data processing since we've started using the new system. Dough. Claire left the dough on the kitchen table for a few hours to let it rise. Sprinkle. Elmer sprinkled some cheese on the salad for extra flavor. Authentic. We want to visit some authentic local markets to experience the true culture of the city. Combination. The partnership between Clark and Rachel provides a powerful combination of knowledge and creativity.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.